really glad to be back in Central Florida. I'm joined by our Secretary for the Department of Children and Family, Siobhan Harris, Mark Wilson, CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, Azim Saju, owner of 3 Orlando hotels and 20 other hotels around the state, and Karen Bailey, a local mom from Ocala whose family has seen impacts from drugs. We're here to do a roundtable discussion on one of the constitutional amendments that's going to be on your ballot. You know, they put these amendments on there, and the thing that I've gotten, I remember when I was running for governor the first time in 2018, I'd have all these folks who were like very passionate, very involved in politics, read the news all the time, just be like, what's the deal with these amendments? Like, I didn't understand, what is this? And it's like, you know, really, really important that people just go into this eyes wide open, because when you amend the Constitution, you can't change that through legislation. Sometimes you'll hear, oh yeah, the amendment's flawed, but the legislature will fix it. No, you cannot change a constitutional provision with ordinary legislation, and so it's permanent. And theoretically, you could re-amend the Constitution, but the chance of that happening is very, very small. So I tell people that a good rule of thumb on these constitutional amendments is your default is no. Because the people who are, well, seriously, I mean, the default is no, and the people that are proposing this, they got a very high burden to prove to you, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that this would be good to put in the Florida's Constitution. And when you're putting in, especially when you're talking about, so Amendment 3 is about the marijuana. That's a policy issue. You know, like the founding fathers would have never put something like that in the U.S. Constitution, right? Because, you know, they had it's a plan of government, there's certain protections for fundamental liberties, but this is a policy issue that is really ripe for political resolution in the normal course of business. When you amend the Constitution just generally, but specifically when you're taking policy, and I'll go through this amendment in a minute, this is a very specific policy regime that they're doing, and there's a reason why they're doing this. You remove that issue from the normal political process. So say Amendment 3 passes, 5-6 years go by, there's like major problems. Well, you're not going to be able to elect new people to then do something different, because this handcuffs you. So it really removes the ability of future generations to decide these issues through the normal democratic process. And so that's why just know, if they really prove to you that this is something that, and you have a firm understanding of it, then, you know, if that's what you think you need to do, then you do. But if you have any hesitation, then you just got to default to no. Now, how did this get here? How did this get on your ballot? It's an interesting question, because it's not something that just, you know, kind of came down from the heavens. This is something that was orchestrated by one mega marijuana company. The text of the amendment was written by the CEO of a mega marijuana company. That company has spent $141 million in order to get this passed. Now, this is a company that's publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and that's an important fact, because as a publicly traded corporation, you would not be able to spend $141 million of corporate funds unless that potentially could yield big profits for your company. So, and if you did it anywhere else, if you just spent $141 million because you really care about Florida, no, that'd be a violation of fiduciary duty. So they're doing this in order to orchestrate profits on the back end. That's the only possible justification. I'd also note, I don't think there's ever been a company in the history of these ballot initiatives that has spent $141 million of corporate funds. I don't think in Florida history, I don't think in American history. It's an exorbitant amount of money. And so the question is why are they doing that? Well, when you read the amendment, you know why they're doing it. So they'll sometimes say that this is legalization of recreational marijuana. That's really only partially true, because if you read this, and again, you can't get this on your ballot. To get the actual text underlined here, you got to go on the Secretary of State's website, and you got to download this. to be able to do. They will not, most of what I will tell you, you will not see on your ballot in this summary. That summary is written by the company too, and they write it in a way to be innocuous and as harmless as possible to get as many votes. So what it does is it gives individuals a right to possess and smoke up to 3 ounces of marijuana, which is about 100 joints, much more than California and Colorado allows, but you have to buy it from them and the weed cartel that's basically in existence. They do not give you the ability to grow your own. So when people talk about, hey, you know, this is just about freedom, well, if it was about freedom, they would have provided you the ability to cultivate your own. They're trying instead to force you into commercial transactions with them so that they're able to monetize this through our Constitution. But it's also not about freedom in this respect, because I think that most Floridians are probably not interested in using marijuana, but they don't really care what people are doing kind of on their own time in the comfort of their own home. But then they look and they say, you know, what about the freedom of people who don't want to be involved in marijuana to be able to go to parks and beaches and restaurants and the town square without having the weed everywhere like we see in Colorado and California and Manhattan? And the reality is this amendment does not have any limitations on the public smoking of marijuana. Nothing in this amendment prohibits that or provides any authority to regulate it. In fact, to the contrary, when you read how it's written, it says there can be no penalties for smoking, civil, criminal, or sanctions. And so how would you sanction somebody for using it in public? It would run afoul of the Constitution. So this will, in effect, authorize rampant public consumption of marijuana in ways that I think would make Denver and San Francisco blush. And you see some of these commercials that they're running. Oh, all Amendment 3 does is it authorizes you to smoke weed privately in the comfort of your own home. That's not what this says. That is not what this says. And this matters. What's in here matters, because this is what's going to govern Florida for generations to come if this were to be passed. So no freedom to grow your own. You got to buy it from them. And then if you don't want to be involved in marijuana, you are not going to have the freedom to do things like you do now without having this be everywhere, because it will be everywhere. And, you know, you think about Florida compared to some of these other states, we get so many visitors. I think it would be worse in Florida, partially because of the way this is written is worse, and then partially, I think, how that would interact with our tourist culture, I think would be really noticeable. It'd be a really significant impact on the quality of life. So if you're looking at this saying, well, I don't really care what people do, I just don't want to be involved in it, understand, you may not want to be involved with marijuana, but if this passes, marijuana is going to be involved with you. And I was just talking, you know, we were down at the Miami Florida State game in South Florida a week ago, and I was talking to some of these University of Miami guys who they traveled to play Cal Berkeley in Berkeley a couple weeks previous. And they told me, they were like, you know, when they're spectating, and like it's like you're getting high just being in the stands, because everywhere is marijuana smoke in the middle of a football game. And you think about it, I mean, like as a parent, you bring young kids, like, is that the environment that we want in the state of Florida at football games and baseball games? Of course not. But that's what's happening in California, and that's exactly what will happen here. Some people say, oh, the legislature can just fix that. Well, first of all, if the amendment's flawed, you shouldn't pass it to begin with. You shouldn't need the legislature to fix these things. So clearly the way they approach this is not about freedom, it's about them maximizing their profits. And if you need any more proof of this, and this, again, this is not in the summary, if you read here, they grant themselves total immunity from civil liability. It says, acting in accordance with this section as it relates to acquiring, cultivating, processing, manufacturing, selling, and distributing marijuana products to adults for personal use shall not be subject to criminal or civil liability or sanctions under Florida law. That is like big pharma on steroids. Nobody gets that kind of blanket liability. I've never seen it. I don't think it's ever been put in a constitution before, and yet that's what they do. If you read the summary on your ballot, that's all you do. You would not know this is in here. If you read the text, you see that it's in here, and you see how inappropriate that is. And I just think about it from the perspective like, if you don't like marijuana, obviously this is not for you. If you're indifferent about marijuana, obviously it's not for you because it's a horribly written amendment. It will impact our public spaces. But even if the biggest marijuana enthusiasts out there would never write a provision to provide total immunity for these people, no way in heck would they do that. So this is a bad provision. This is a meaningful provision. It will allow them to act in ways so they can grow it. You're not allowed to grow it, but they can grow it, cultivate it, and then if you get sick from what they're doing, you can't sue them because it includes distributing. If they're distributing weed to one of their dispensaries and they run you over, you can't sue them with one of their trucks. I mean, this is crazy that you would put this in here, but that's what they're doing. Now, you'll hear, well, they want marijuana to be safe and regulated market in Florida. We have legal regulated marijuana through our medical marijuana program in Florida. So that's already legal for people that really want it, and we have almost 1 million people who have these medical marijuana cards. I can guarantee you not all 1 million of them have debilitating illnesses that are getting prescribed. That's just the reality. I mean, come on, we all know this, right? There are people, if you really want it in Florida, you can get it already, but it's not necessarily something that's viewed as appropriate in public, and so there's a balance there that has gone out of whack in places like Colorado and California. They also say, well, the people shouldn't end up, in prison because of smoking marijuana. There's 0 people in Florida's prison system for smoking marijuana or for possessing personal amounts of marijuana. 0. And that's been true probably for a long time, but certainly since I've been governor, that's been true. So there isn't this rush. I mean, I talk to all law enforcement. No, by the way, they'll kind of run these ads with some of these sheriffs that pop up. Law enforcement opposes Amendment 3 overwhelmingly. Fraternal Order of Police opposes it. PBA opposes it. Florida Sheriff's Association opposes it. I think of we have 66 sheriffs. I would say probably at least 60 have come out against Amendment 3. But if you talk to them, they are not focusing resources on people using marijuana recreationally in their homes or stuff like that. That's not what they're doing. They're focusing on things that really impact people's quality of life. If this passes, it is going to change. They're going to have to actually devote more attention to some of the things that are going to happen as a result of this because they're second and third order effects. So this idea that somehow people are being persecuted over smoking recreational, that is not true in Florida. I don't think it's true anywhere, but it's definitely not true here. So that's not a reason to vote for this. They also say this is going to be some type of a windfall for education, all this money for education and for law enforcement. I mean, anyone who believes that, please talk to me after this because I got oceanfront property in Arizona I would like to sell you. I don't think so. But it's important because we know that that's promised on a lot of things. It doesn't materialize. But reading the amendment, there's nothing in this amendment that provides 1 penny to education, to law enforcement, nothing. And so that is just fabricated if they're saying that. I also think it's an issue about the argument is, well, people smoke marijuana anyways, which is true. If you do this, then it'll be regulated, taxed, and then there won't be a black market. That is not true at all. First of all, if you tax and regulate something, the price goes up. And so if it's everywhere in public when this passes, it's going to be more acceptable to smoke on the street corners and all these other stuff. Use will go up in Florida, does anyone think use going up is a good thing? I don't think so. It's one thing to say you shouldn't be in jail for smoking marijuana, but it's not something that should be encouraged in society. I don't think it's good for people to be recreation, but I know different people feel differently. But the reality is what will happen is the black market will undercut the price from the tax marijuana. That's what happened in Colorado. That's what happened in California. The black market in Colorado and California today is bigger than it was prior to them doing the marijuana legalization. So that will happen here 100%. So anybody that goes into this thinking like, well, we won't have a black market, that is not true. That has not happened anywhere, and that will not happen here in the state of Florida. You also think about how does this impact children and families. What's happened in these other states, and it's not legal in Colorado or California to sell this stuff to children and to minors, but what happens is marijuana big companies, they create things like gummies, they package them in things that look like candy that would appeal to young people, particularly like I've seen Sour Patch Kids. Like you think it's Sour Patch Kids, and it ends up being something else. And so the question is, that ends up working its way, even if illicitly, into the hands of young people. So you look at like California, there was an ad from one of the ER doctors out there against Amendment 3 saying, she's seen all these young kids now coming in because they're eating these gummies. And they get those because there's weed everywhere, and so they get the gummies, and that creates huge, huge problems. So just as a parent of young kids, is there any argument that passing this would be good for kids? I don't think you can make that argument. It will obviously be bad in some respects because just like Colorado and California, not allowed to sell it to a 13-year-old there, but somehow this stuff ends up getting into circulation and they end up using. And the gummies and stuff can be very dangerous because of the potency of it. So I think that's just something, go into it eyes wide open. If you're for this amendment, I mean, it will impact youth in the state of Florida. There's just no way that you can say it won't. Another thing that it will do is safety on the roads. So Colorado saw a big spike in traffic fatalities and traffic accidents for people driving while high on marijuana. And the problem is that law enforcement doesn't have a tool to detect it the way they do alcohol. So if you're swerving and you're drunk, they pull you over, breathalyzer, field sobriety, right then and there, they got what they need. Weed is not the same thing. So a lot of times it's like a crash happens and then they got to try to figure out if somebody had been smoking it prior to that or using it prior to that. And so, I mean, we already have, Florida's an interesting place to drive, particularly in different parts of our state, as is. So do you really want to throw this into the mix? And just be clear, like there will be more traffic accidents and the roads will be less safe. That's happened everywhere that this has been tried. So you got to ask yourself, is that something that you want to see going forward? And I think not. So just the main thing is if you take the time to read this, the text, not just what's on your ballot, and if you honestly think this is good policy that should be cemented in our Constitution and handcuff this society for generations to come, if you honestly believe that, it's a free country. But go into it eyes wide open. I think most people, when they see what's up here, say, wait a minute, this one company wrote it. They spent $141 million, and they've probably spent more than that now, $141 million to pass it. They're doing it, you can't grow your own. You got to buy it from them. And then if they get you sick, they're totally immune from civil liability, but they don't limit your ability, people's ability to smoke this stuff in public. And so it's going to be everywhere. I don't see how the biggest weed enthusiasts in the world would not have drafted it like this. This is a corporate power grab, plain and simple. So go into this eyes wide open. If you haven't voted, please vote tomorrow. I mean, I said it that we're working on kind of like looking at the turnout. I talked to the Secretary of State. We got 11.1, 11.2 million voted raw votes in 2020 presidential election. I thought it was probably going to be under. They tell me maybe it'll be about the same. Maybe a little under, maybe about the same. So we'll see. But bottom line is a lot of people have already voted. It looks like probably half the vote will have come just from early in-person voting, and then the other half will be a combination of mail and election day voting. So more people voted earlier this time, I think, in that early in-person. But you still have tomorrow. I know there's a couple counties where it's open today, but tomorrow you have an ability, so I would encourage everyone to go exercise your rights. Okay, we're going to hear from some of the other folks here. So we'll start with Siobhan Harris, as our Secretary of the Department of Children and Families.
I want to start off by thanking the governor for his advocacy and leadership on this topic and doing all that he can to ensure that Florida continues to be example for other states. The governor has laid out some pretty compelling arguments in terms of the concerns with this flawed amendment. I'm going to address this issue wearing two hats. My role as secretary of an agency that's charged with addressing substance use, and then my most important role, as a mom. At the Department of Children and Families, we're responsible for raising awareness of the dangers of substance use. The fact that once you start it, it's hard to stop, and it has ruined countless lives. We're spending millions each year to fight the opioid epidemic and other illicit drug use. So why on earth would we want to erode our progress? You'll hear that marijuana use is not a gateway drug. We hear heartbreaking stories from individuals who share that their journey down the winding road of addiction started with marijuana. So it's hard for me to fathom why we would want to normalize any form of drug use in our state. And if you're a data person, here are the undisputed facts. 1 in 10 adults will become addicted, and 3 out of 10 of them will experience serious consequences like cognitive impairment and engaging in more high-risk behaviors like driving while impaired, showing up to work high, tardiness, absenteeism. That's not what we want. And with daily use, the odds of addiction go up to 50%. Legalizing marijuana will increase the risk of major car accidents, like the governor stated, emergency room visits, and potential overdoses. And if you're thinking personal choice, personal consequences, I think not. As a state, we will literally spend years and millions of dollars having to educate further on the negative impacts, and taxpayers will end up picking a portion of the downstream impact, starting with addiction and the mental health treatment bill. Because if you can't keep a job because you're showing up late and you're tardy all the time, and you can't afford health insurance, and guess who covers the uninsured and underinsured? DCF, state and local governments. As a mom, I worry about what this means for our kids. This is a threat to public safety. I do not want to go into the public spaces I love so much in our state with my family and be confronted with people openly smoking weed. Not only do I loathe the smell because it absolutely reeks, but I hate even more the message we're sending to our youth. We will preach all day long, say no to drugs, but then they'll walk outside and they'll see it on the street corner and in our beaches and our parks. Proponents have said this isn't about kids. The amendment is only about adults. Make no mistake, this will desensitize our youth, and the impacts are detrimental. 1 in 6 youth who use marijuana will become addicted, and they are at an increased risk for depression, anxiety, and psychosis. They will say that kids get their drugs from the black market, not these regulated entities. Well, you just heard about the explosion of the black market in states that legalized marijuana. And let's not even get started on marijuana laced with other substances, which we see too. I also worry about our littlest ones. The governor touched on this, but it's worth stating it again. In states that legalized marijuana, they saw an over 1,000% increase in children under the age of 6 hospitalized for THC poisoning because the edibles older adults around them were eating looked like candy. You don't have to take my word for it. Talk to the folks who live in Colorado and California who can tell you what devastating impacts this has done to their local area. We may not all share the same ideals or think about things the same way, but I hope we can all agree that the things I just talked about are bad for our state. Know the facts and protect our state from the harms that surely will come. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Azim.
Governor, thank you so much for your leadership on this and so many other important issues. I'm an entrepreneur and a business owner and job creator, and we're in the hospitality space, and when people use marijuana in these rooms, the rooms get a permanent odor to them, which you just can't eliminate. The odor goes into the hallways. I've been to our own hotels with my family, and they've certainly smelt it. And the thing about the hospitality industry is for every one person who comes here, especially with social media, that has a bad experience, that's 100 other people that aren't going to come here and bring dollars to our economy, bring taxes to our economy, and the consequences of that are immense. And the second thing is, as the governor pointed out, is that we don't want our Constitution to become weaponized and create monopolies and things that are not beneficial to us. As a hospitality industry, we go through the legislative process so that the conversations on policy-related matters are continuing and ongoing, and the debate is continuing and ongoing even after the legislation is passed. We don't try to weaponize our Constitution by creating monopolistic pricing, especially in an industry such as this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Karen Bailey.
Okay. I hope this is on. Is it on? Okay. I have lost my 2 and only children to opioid addiction. Innocently enough, I was driving my son to a counseling session, and I asked him, how did this start for you? And he said, that's an easy one, Mama. He said, it started with marijuana. And I said, well, explain to me how that happened. And he says, well, when you're out at the lake wakeboarding with your friends, or you're tailgating at a Gator game, or after a football or baseball game, he says, you're hanging out with your friends, you don't want the fun to end. And it always started with marijuana, innocently enough. But he says, the marijuana runs out. And I don't think a lot of parents are thinking about that, but maybe you should, if you have children, just pry into that a little bit and say, what happens when the pot runs out if you're smoking, or if you know someone that's smoking? And then he said, someone always has pills, and pills were just passed around. So before you knew it, my child was addicted, and it led to my daughter's addiction. Siblings, brothers and sisters, the way they socialize, and this doesn't get talked about a lot. And I also want to bring up the fact that marijuana was their gateway drug and their relapse drug. And we don't talk about how a person falls back into relapse with opioids. I think that, again, for my kids, in their minds, this was safe, and everybody else was doing it. All these states are legalizing it. It's medicine. So what would one little joint be while hanging out with your friends? That takes away their sobriety, and we've got to fight for sobriety, I think, more so now today than ever. But the most important thing was, as easily as Corey and Alyssa would have shared a joint together, they shared pills together on September the 21st in 2011. Corey died, Alyssa survived, and 42 months later, we lost Alyssa. And I can only say, I know Corey and Alyssa were saved. We're in a church, so I can say it. We're a Christian family. They were saved, and I know where they are because the Bible tells us so. And while, if any parents going through that, I know a lot have and a lot are, if you find yourself in the grief pit and you're mourning and you find that you can't get out of it, just pray, and God will come to you and he will love you through it. I know that for a fact. The Bible's true, and God is real, and the God who created you loves you. So thank you. So I want to end it with, out of love for our children, vote no on 3 and 4.
Okay, Mark Wilson, Florida Chamber of Commerce.
All right, thank you, Governor. I'm Mark Wilson. I'm the president of Florida's Chamber of Commerce. And Karen, thank you for sharing your story. My story doesn't compare to yours, but thank you very much, and we're sorry for your loss. You're going to see them again one day, I believe that. Also, drug overdoses has become one of the leading causes of death in the workplace, and that's something we need to think about and talk about too. And so, again, thank you for your story. Governor, thank you for your leadership. What you and the First Lady have done is made it possible for us to defeat Amendment 3. Because what's happening, this is like a book, right? You go and you look at a book cover and you're like, oh, this is a great book. And then you start reading the pages and you're like, wait, this isn't at all what they advertised. And so we all owe you a big debt. Thank you very much, Governor and First Lady. So what I wanted to add to the equation is we've clearly talked about how this is bad for families, how Amendment 3 is bad for families. It's horrible for law enforcement, and it's bad for education, it's bad for communities. I wanted to just spend a minute on why this is bad for local businesses and why it's bad for our economy in Florida. So let's start big picture, right? Since the governor took office, our economy's grown faster than in any other state economy in the country. Since I might get fact-checked, Idaho's grown a little faster, but Idaho's economy fits inside of Hillsborough County, so I'm not really counting that one, okay? Now, if Florida was a country, we would be the 15th largest economy on the planet. That's how big Florida's economy is becoming. And right here in the Orlando area, OEP and others, you need to create over 100,000 jobs by 2030, right? So the reason I give you that, from my perspective, why in the world would we do this to Florida? Why in the world would we legalize drugs at a time when we're the national example of how small businesses get started and how we create jobs in Florida? So I talk a lot about don't California my Florida. And what we're talking about is what other panelists have said. Our state cannot be for sale. We have to protect our Constitution, because if this thing passes, then the next person with $150 million is going to say, wait, I want my idea in there too. And so the stakes couldn't be higher. And so we need to vote no on Amendment 3. A couple of quick points from the business perspective, and it was mentioned earlier, the governor mentioned it and others. I chaired our National Association of State Chambers, so I know every single state chamber president in the country, and I called most of the states where they've passed the legalization of recreational marijuana. I've talked to New York and Colorado and Arizona and others, Ohio. And I said, well, how's it going? Tell me about it. Every single other state's business community said, well, it sounded good in the beginning, but it's awful, it's horrible. And if you can stop it, because you'll never be able to undo it. 4 big things. The smell. Everyone here has already talked about it. The businesses have said you cannot escape it. It's everywhere. It's in the stadiums. It's in the businesses. It's in the restaurants. It's in the hotels. Second item is the tax revenue. Other states were told by the people who sell drugs, hey, if you do this, we're going to make all kinds of money for schools, for law enforcement, for roads. It hasn't worked anywhere. In fact, now in Colorado, they're trying to figure out how in the world are they going to pay their bills, because the drug money wasn't there, the tax money wasn't there. A big one, and they're dealing with this in Ohio right now, is safety, workplace safety. So think about it. You come to work and you're high, right? What in the world is going to happen? You're operating a forklift, you're driving a delivery, and you have an accident. I'll come back to that point when I make my close. And then roads are less safe. The governor already talked about this, right? We have 10 million people in Florida who work. Right? And so whether they're driving to or from work or whether they're driving for work, we don't need less safe roads. We need more safe roads. And so big reason the Florida Chamber wants us to vote no on Amendment 3 beyond protecting our Constitution is, remember this, there's only 2 groups that benefit from Amendment 3. The first group are the people who grow drugs and sell drugs. And the second group, the governor talked about the legal immunity that the marijuana industry would have if Amendment 3 passes. Do you know what that means? That means that the second big group who wins are all those people on the billboards that are telling you to sue someone. Check them out on your way back home today. Look at them. They're everywhere. Those people, the lawyers on the billboards, they're the big winners. And there's a reason they want you to vote yes on Amendment 3. And you know why? It's because they can't sue the people who are going to grow and sell drugs. So they've got to sue somebody. Guess who they're going to sue? They're going to sue the 2 million businesses in Florida who are making this economy work. And so there's all kinds of reasons, whether it's because it's bad for families, bad for kids, bad for law enforcement, or bad for local businesses. We need to vote no on Amendment 3. And Governor, thank you for giving us a platform.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the way this is written, and the words matter, because you could approach this by just saying, there won't be, any criminal penalties for, private use or whatever. But this is just blanket. And so what happens is, when you start talking about running a business, it's not like you're just talking about something that's a normal thing in society. This will be basically a constitutionally protected right. So that just creates a whole can of worms about schools, businesses, all these different things. And the way a lot of this has typically been done, it's like First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting freedom of speech. That has been applied to local, state governments. But it's like if you have someone over at your house and they're saying things you don't like, you could kick them out. It's private, right? This, I think, how this interacts with private entities, at a minimum, would be subjected to massive litigation. But it very well may be very intrusive to people that just want to conduct their private affairs. And so I think this is written in a really poor way. Even if you wanted to get to this point, doing it this way, I think is really, really bad. And I think it'll have huge ramifications for businesses, for individuals that may not want anything to do with marijuana. I think it's also just pointed out, and we got Amendment 3 and Amendment 4, which are basically both sponsored by special interests. And between the two of them, there's been over $250 million trying to pass those spent in Florida. And that's an astronomical amount of money. $250 million. They don't spend that unless they think they're going to recoup that somehow with either this or Amendment 4. So I would just keep in mind, 3, the campaign to pass 3 is almost all funded by one mega marijuana company, $141 million plus. 4 is being funded in part by foreign money. There's this 1630 fund out of D.C. It's one of the Soros groups, and that was seeded by this Swiss billionaire who gave hundreds of millions of dollars, and so they've now done 15 million into this. So again, it's like, this is our Constitution. Why are we having foreign money come in to try to change with this stuff? And so I think the way this has gone, it's really gotten hijacked by very concerted interests on both amendments. You go, you read it. If you perfectly understand everything and you're 100% sure it's going to be good, and you vote, that's up to you, But if you don't, if you have any questions about it, obviously, if you think it's bad on its face, well, then it's obvious that you just vote no. Protect the Constitution of the state of Florida. Don't let it be hijacked by people that don't have your best interests at heart. So, how many of you have already voted? How many of you are voting tomorrow? That's interesting. That's a change. If I asked that question 4 years ago, a lot of people were waiting for Election Day. Now people are going and banking their votes earlier, which I think is probably a good thing. It certainly means less lines on Election Day. But if you haven't voted, we encourage you to do your civic duty. However you vote on these, it's your civic duty and your right and responsibility. So please exercise that with due care. But go into these amendments with your eyes wide open. Understand who's proposing it, what it's going to do. Any questions that you have about it, you resolve in favor of just simply voting no. So thanks, everybody. God bless you.